It's 1984, and the entire Soviet Union is on edge. A man in a hat, coat, and glasses is effortlessly luring children into the woods, never to be seen again. The hunt for the culprit has been ongoing for over 3 years. Finally, in September, the police begin surveillance on a suspicious man who bears a striking resemblance to the composite sketch. They tail him, noting several peculiar details. He changes transportation methods frequently, seemingly without a planned route, and attempts to strike up conversations with women at bus stops, often in a suggestive manner. He spends the night at the main bus station and then heads to the market during the day. It's there that they apprehend him. In his possession, they find a large kitchen knife, a soiled towel, jars of Vaseline, a bar of soap, and 2 balls of rope. The police officers who have been following him are convinced they have their man, the one they've been pursuing for all these years. They're certain they've caught the killer. However, within hours, they realize their mistake. They apologize to a certain Andrei Romanovich Chikatilo and release him. To understand the genesis of Chikatilo, the remorseless monster who murdered indiscriminately, one must delve into his unusual past. Chikatilo was born on October 16, 1936, in the small Ukrainian village of Yabloknoy during the Soviet era. It was a truly difficult period. The nation was preparing for war, and a devastating famine loomed. Unsurprisingly, Chikatilo's family lived in abject poverty. His father went to the front, leaving his mother to struggle to survive with her young son. From his earliest years, his mother frequently warned little Andrei to stay inside, lest he be kidnapped and eaten, like his older brother Stepan. However, the actual existence of Stepan remains uncertain. There is no concrete evidence to corroborate Stepan's existence. One theory posits that the story was a frightening fabrication used to intimidate young Andrei and keep him close to home. Yet, it's important to note that cases of cannibalism did occur during those years, giving some context to the severity of the famine, which drove people to desperation. After a childhood marked by hunger and fear, Chikatilo struggled to integrate into society, but his attempts were unsuccessful. During his school years, he was quiet and withdrawn. While this experience is shared by many children, his particular internal tragedy lay in his impotence. An incident occurred that would ignite a deeper well of rage and hatred towards women within him. He was captivated by a young woman, and she eventually reciprocated his affections. However, when they attempted intimacy, he failed. The girl laughed and later shared the details with her friends. The story spread, and soon the entire village was aware of the incident. It was at this moment that thoughts of revenge began to fester in his mind. Then, still young and ambitious, Andrei chose to seek vengeance through self-improvement. He resolved to become a journalist and prove to everyone that he was not a failure. But after failing the entrance exam, he began to blame everyone and became completely disillusioned with life. This was the period when his inner demons began to gradually surface. After enrolling in the Kharkov Institute of Communications, he began to peep at women, but his fantasies were not sexual in nature, but violent. He derived satisfaction from imagining how he would avenge himself on the women who had rejected him. And perhaps it was the army that prevented him from turning his thoughts into reality at that time. After graduating as an engineer, he was drafted at the age of 21. There's a theory that he suffered sexual abuse from his fellow soldiers in the army, and this experience sparked a hatred not only towards women, but towards all people. When Chikatilo returned from the army, he hoped to find a sense of normalcy in family life. Therefore, in 1963, he got married, and despite the birth of his children, Ludmila and Yuri, he never found happiness in marriage. It was more of a duty than a genuine desire. His true desires were quite different, and they became increasingly horrifying with each passing year. At the age of 34, Chikatilo received a pedagogical education and began working at a school. This is the turning point when he will feel his power and impunity. He directly blackmailed the students, saying that their position in the educational institution depended on how they would communicate with him. He pestered the students in every possible way, caressed them, and was vulgar. But the worst thing is that the entire teaching staff knew about his tricks. But as was often the case in the era of developed socialism, it was decided not to air the quarrel in public, and no disciplinary action was taken against Chikatilo. In general, everyone knew, but pretended that nothing was happening. And only after some time, Chikatilo was asked to write a letter of resignation. Attention, with the wording of his own free will. But Chikatilo did not stop there. He began to notice that sexual arousal increased sharply when his partner resisted and screamed, which prompted him to commit new harassments. In 1978, he and his family moved to the mines. On September 10th, he began working as a teacher at a vocational school, and at night he would come to the dormitory, where he would try to harass the students. He climbed into one of the boys' beds, took off his underwear, and while he was sleeping there, abused him. This story caused quite a stir among the students. They began to mock Chikatilo and even allowed themselves to kick him or hit him with their hands. At the same time, he secretly bought a small house in Shakti, where he committed his first murder. On December 22nd, Yelena Zakitnova disappeared. The 9-year-old, a second grader named Lena, met Chikatilo on a tram at a stop in Shakti. For several days, Chikatilo treated the girl to chewing gum, and after a couple of days, he said he had run out. Lena already trusted the kind man and went with him. That same evening, the girl's parents contacted the police to report her missing. According to Chikatilo, he only wanted to have fun with her, but when he tried to undress her, she started screaming and struggling. He was frightened that the neighbors might hear the cries, so he fell on her and began to strangle her. While preparing this video, I found many scenes from the crime scenes. I must say, it's not for the faint of heart. However, the murder of Yelena was attributed to another individual, specifically Alexander Kravchenko, a previously convicted criminal who had recently been released from prison after serving 10 years for the rape and murder of a 10-year-old girl. Despite having an alibi, Alexander's situation did not improve. The women who had provided him with an alibi altered their testimonies under pressure from the investigators, and a fellow inmate was planted in Kravchenko's cell to beat and demoralize him. This led to Kravchenko ceasing to defend himself and confessing to the crime. Initially, he was sentenced to 15 years in prison, but the girl's family appealed to have a case reviewed, and on March 23, 1983, he was executed. In this case, Chikatilo was incredibly fortunate, as the investigation possessed information from the outset that directly implicated him in Yelena's death. A witness was quickly found who had seen the man leading Yelena away from the bus stop. Based on her account, a subjective portrait was created that accurately described Chikatilo's appearance. Chikatilo himself was questioned as a witness and aroused suspicion by admitting to secretly purchasing a house. Such behavior seemed rather strange for a typical family man. However, all of this material vanished from the criminal case following Kravchenko's confession, indicating a clear cover-up. Consequently, Chikatilo vanished from the investigators' radar. He displayed no criminal activity for 32 months. During this period, he concluded that he should not kill near his home and should seek employment that involved long-distance travel. With this in mind, he gave up teaching and became a supply clerk. This type of work allowed him to go on business trips and stay away from home for extended periods without raising much suspicion. While on these trips, Chikatilo searched for potential victims, and he would commit his next murder 3 years later. He met his victim at a bus station. 17-year-old Larissa and her family had relocated to the Rostov region from Moldova. The girl was still unfamiliar with the large city, and Chikatilo took advantage of this. He persuaded Larissa to take a walk with him to the left bank of the Don. There, in a green area near the Napri Cafe, he suddenly attacked her. The girl's body was discovered the following day. Chikatilo had bitten off her right nipple and strangled her. Initially, he acted with great care, killing rarely and cautiously. And, after murdering his third victim, Lyubov Buryuk, he began a series of killings. By 1982, he had murdered 7 children between the ages of 9 and 18. Chikatilo had already developed a clear approach to each individual, regardless of their age or gender. Most often, he would meet his future victims at bus stops and train stations, and then, under some pretext, such as showing them a shortcut, helping them carry a heavy bag, showing them his stamp collection, or offering them a treat, He would lead them into a forest belt or another secluded area. Sometimes, Chikatilo would walk several kilometers with his victims, always walking ahead, and, after moving away from populated areas, would unexpectedly attack with a knife. Law enforcement initially theorized that a mentally ill person was likely responsible for the killings, prompting an investigation into individuals with a history of psychiatric treatment. In September 1983, police apprehended a man named Shabirov, who suffered from intellectual disabilities at a tram depot in Rostov. He soon confessed to having stolen a car with his acquaintance, Kolonik, also intellectually disabled, and to killing children. They were immediately taken into custody, and the investigation was dubbed the Fool's Case. The detainees provided confessions regarding the alleged murders, but their accounts were consistently inconsistent. They were often mistaken about the crime scenes, clothing of the victims, and sometimes took responsibility for the crimes, while other times they recanted their statements. Meanwhile, the killings continued. In September, Chikatilo murdered an unknown woman near Novoshakhtinsk, followed by 19-year-old Vera Shevkin in the Shakhty region in October. In December, 14-year-old Sergei Markov was killed near the Parisianovka station. In January 1984, 17-year-old Natalia Shalapanina was murdered in the Rostov Aviators Park. In February, 44-year-old Marta Ryabenka was killed there as well. Several other intellectually disabled individuals were detained on suspicion of committing these murders. They also confessed to the crimes, but their testimonies were similarly contradictory. It wasn't until 1985, when the case was taken over by investigator Isa Kostov, that the Fool's Case was officially closed. In 1984, Chikatilo murdered a staggering 15 individuals, bringing his total number of victims to 32. His reign of terror could have ended that year. On September 13th, Chikatilo's suspicious behavior at a suburban bus station near Aviator Park, the site where the bodies of the family he murdered had been discovered, drew the attention of the police. Law enforcement surveilled him for a day and arrested him on September 14th. His briefcase contained a soiled towel, a kitchen knife, a jar of petroleum jelly, a bar of soap, and 2 balls of twine. Chikatilo attributed the items to his work as a supply officer. Blood tests were taken from Chikatilo, and his blood type was identified as type A. However, the semen found on the body of Dima Tashnikov was type AB. Since the blood types were different, this appeared to exonerate Chikatilo. This discrepancy was later explained by the theory of paradoxical secretion, which claimed that Chikatilo's blood type was A, but his bodily secretions were AB, effectively providing him with an alibi. As the woodland killings persisted, Operation Lesopolosa was launched in December of '85. This was the most expansive law enforcement effort to catch the perpetrator, with the main objective being to apprehend Chikatilo. Military helicopters were even deployed in the hunt. To illustrate the government's dedication to capturing the serial killer, the search for the murderer cost approximately $125,000 in the 1990s, which would be about $4 million today. Meanwhile, Chikatilo managed to fool everyone by volunteering to help catch the killer himself. As soon as he sensed increased surveillance, he became more cautious and did not commit any murders throughout the entirety of 1986. In 1987, he only murdered outside of the Rostov region. By this time, his death toll had reached 34 individuals. From 1986 to 1988, another serial killer, Konstantin Chermashkin, operated in the Rostov region. He murdered 3 young women and 1 girl in the city of Bataysk. Konstantin hoped that the Forest Belt butcher would be blamed for his crimes. However, the investigation quickly determined that a different perpetrator was responsible. Konstantin took jewelry as his trophies, and his method of killing differed from that of Chikatilo. Consequently, Chermashkin was apprehended and sentenced to death in early 1989. In 1990, Chikatilo would claim 8 more victims, with his final murder occurring on November 6th. On that day, Chikatilo met 22-year-old Svetlana Krostik on a train and convinced her to accompany him to his dacha, or country house. Svetlana, a woman of loose morals, understood the implication of the invitation and was willing to engage in intimacy with the polite man. Chikatilo lured the girl into the woods, where he murdered her. After the killing, he exited the forest and encountered a police officer who asked for his identification. The officer recorded his name and let Chikatilo go home. However, when Svetlana's body was found near the same train platform a few days later, police officer Kostev, upon reviewing reports, noticed the name Chikatilo, whom had previously been detained in '84 on suspicion of involvement in the murders in the wooded areas. Subsequently, Chikatilo was put under surveillance, and on November 20th, he was finally apprehended. He was interrogated for 10 days, but he denied any involvement. There was no direct evidence against him either. Then, investigator Kostev sought help from psychiatrist Buchanovsky and asked him to speak with the detainee, to which he agreed. Buchanovsky, after a lengthy conversation with Chikatilo, probed his inner resentments and pains, and the latter, in tears, began to testify, during which he confessed to committing 55 murders, of which the court recognized 52. When the trial began, Chikatilo initially behaved normally, but soon feigned illness to avoid the death penalty. During the court hearings, he shouted, insulted the judge, mocked the relatives of the deceased, exposed his genitals, and claimed he was pregnant and breastfeeding, but this did not help him. On October 15th, he was sentenced to death. After the sentence was passed, Chikatilo was taken to the Novichorkassk prison. While in the death row cell, Chikatilo monitored his health, exercised, and ate with appetite, living as if he were creating a better version of himself for the future. According to one version, he did this in order to occupy his mind and not think about the fact that he would soon be shot. In addition, he wrote to Russian President Boris Yeltsin and asked for a pardon. But on January 4th, 1994, his final appeal was rejected, and a month later, on February 13th, Chikatilo was informed that he would be taken to Moscow for a new examination on a night flight, and the next evening, he was taken to the place of execution. Chikatilo thought he was being taken to Moscow until the very last moment, and this long 12-year story finally ended with a shot in the back of the head. When I started writing the script for this video, I wondered how it could be that absolutely everyone has heard of Chikatilo. Now I understand that his character is so mysterious that it sparks a certain interest. Just imagine, he committed such terrible murders and then went home, went to work, and lived like everyone else. For more than 10 years, he confused the entire investigation. Of course, not without luck. And if it weren't for the case when his last name was accidentally entered in the report, it is unknown how long they would have looked for him and how many murders he would have committed. If you like this video, please subscribe and leave a comment. Bye everyone.